All right. Yes, please. We're going to get started here. I'm Richard Newell. I'm a member of the Duke faculty. I'm a director of the Duke University Energy Initiative. And really happy to welcome you to this panel discussion on increasing energy efficiency through community engagement. Our panelists are going to tell you about their experience with a program called, from the city of Charlotte, called Envision Charlotte, which aims to build the most sustainable urban core in the nation. Before they begin, I just want to tell you very briefly about the Energy Initiative at Duke University, for those of you who aren't already familiar with it. The Energy Initiative is a university-wide interdisciplinary collaboration. It cuts across arts and sciences, engineering, law, policy, business, and the environment. The focus of the Energy Initiative across Duke is on advancing an accessible, affordable, reliable, and clean energy system. And so we're really thrilled to have the panelists today help us do that. Energy Initiative is focused on educating future energy innovators, researching to create new solutions, and engaging with business and government leaders to help improve energy decisions. If you'd like to learn more about the Energy Initiative, please check out our website, energy.duke.edu. You can sign up for one or more of our email lists to find out about future events. You can also sign up there for listserv. We've got a number of additional events occurring this semester before the semester closes. You're all welcome to those. And now I want to hand it over to Jim Rogers, the former CEO of Duke Energy, and he's now one of the inaugural Rubenstein Fellows at Duke University. He's been here for this academic year. He co-taught a groundbreaking course on renewables in the world's poor, focused on how to meet the needs of the 1.2 billion people who do not currently have access to power, and he's currently writing a book on the same topic. Jim has also been gracious enough to work with something we call power lunches, which are focused seminars. He's worked on mentoring with students, and he's also held office hours where students have access to his many, many years of wisdom in energy, environmental policy, and business development. So let's take a moment to thank Jim for his work, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you. Richard, thank you very much. Delighted to be here today, delighted to moderate this panel. I want y'all to think of this panel as a warm-up for the game tonight. Okay, maybe not, but we'll do our best to do that. And let me just kick off before I introduce our panel and say Envision Charlotte was something that came together in 2011. And basically, it was tied in with an effort to create Charlotte as an energy hub. And so, well, how can we be an energy hub unless we in the downtown community area come together and have a more efficient use of electricity in the community? It's a perfect public-private partnership. The downtown area, over 60 properties joined in, over 20 million square feet, and they made a commitment to reduce their usage of electricity 20% from 2011 to 2016. Duke Energy and Cisco provided upfront roughly $5.3 million to buy the monitoring equipment. Duke was able to recover, as well as Cisco. Cisco recovered 20% of the 5.3. Duke recovered 80% of the 5.3 through the savings that came from the deployment. The one thing I would say about this program that I think is unique, but also gives you a sense of the way forward in terms of reducing demand for electricity, is that it started with a competition between the buildings, with kiosks in the lobbies of every building. And from that competitive spirit came behavioral change. And on the heels of behavioral change came the deployment of technologies that actually allow the buildings to operate in a more efficient way. Quite frankly, that's the roadmap to producing significant productivity gains in the use of electricity. And I thought that this whole project was unique in the United States. It was the first city to come together and make that commitment. So with that, let me start, Rob, and just come across. I'm going right to left.
Good afternoon.
I don't know if this is the Wisconsin side, the Duke side.
Well, this is the Duke chair right here. I'm a Duke alum, so I'm pulling with you guys tonight, and very glad to be here. Thank you.
That's great. Tell us who you...
So I work for Bank of America, and we support Envision Charlotte financially. I'm also on the board of Bank of America, and my interest is twofold with Envision Charlotte. Number one, we're very interested in the nonprofit itself and all of the great things that Jim focused on. I also manage our real estate portfolio in the southeastern United States, so that's a big chunk of buildings, and all the activity that we do, we can learn from with this program to deploy elsewhere over time, which is a big goal of ours.
Rob, thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, Kevin Franklin. I'm with Duke Energy. I now serve on the board of Envision Charlotte for Duke Energy. I previously managed the behavioral programs that Jim mentioned that saved or contributed to some of the savings. I now have responsibility for delivering products and services to our residential and commercial customer base across our 6 jurisdictions.
Kevin, thank you.
Sure. Rob Focus. I'm the Energy and Sustainability Manager for the City of Charlotte. And I've been involved with Envision from very early on. I'm now a board member. And interestingly, in Charlotte, one of the things that Envision has done is really set us apart in the smart city space, and we can talk more about that later, but I'm very involved in that space now too.
He also graduated, just to show you how we're filling out the panel, from Duke, from the law school and the environmental science school.
That's right.
Yeah, Tom Shercliffe. I'm co-founder of Intelligent Buildings, and we were a consulting company on the project, and also served as the founding chairman of the nonprofit Envision Charlotte. And I'm sorry, but I went to NC State, but I'm still with you tonight.
Are you though?
That's not a close.
I am though.
That's not a close call.
All right, so I'm really in the minority here because I'm an Ohio State grad, so Big Ten Conference. Sorry.
Did you talk about? Are you talking about football?
No, but Kurt Radkin from Wells Fargo. I'm in the corporate properties group, and similar to Rob, kind of chief cat herder for all things sustainable and energy efficiency driven within that group, and also sit on the board of Envision Charlotte.
Let me start with you, if I may, with a question. How do you see the project continuing in the future? And I'd like each of y'all to just address that from your perspective.
Starting with me.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you go to Ohio State.
I'll tell you, the behavioral component is a big deal. There's lots of levers we can pull from an energy efficiency strategy, trying to put in LED lighting controls, or doing other things with set points. But I think at the end of the day, you can't deploy technology fast enough to make as much difference as we need to make. And so this idea that it's everyone's accountability to kind of take action, I think is huge, and certainly the Envision Charlotte effort around really trying to get organization around how to drive that behavioral change was a critical element, and we're trying to continue to mirror that every day, kind of, and scale that well beyond Charlotte. We've got a big portfolio, so we're trying to think about that on a broader scale.
Yeah, well, I think going deeper, and one of the reasons the nonprofit was formed was once we moved past, or saw the opportunity to move past even energy, what we could do with water and waste. And I think that's an opportunity we've been realizing. The other thing that was most exciting to me in the beginning was it was so special that I thought that, and we all thought, that it could be a model for any urban community in the world. And the response we've gotten has been indicative that is the case. So I think that's another possibility to keep sharing and replicating this in other communities.
Yeah, I think the sky is the limit with Envision. I think we have a huge opportunity. As Tom mentioned, we're focused not only on energy reduction, but waste reduction, water reduction, and improving air quality. And one of the keys to our success, and one of the things we recognized really early, and something we were able to build on, was Charlotte's spirit of collaboration. As Jim mentioned, it's a public-private partnership. And that's how we're really able to move the dial in Charlotte, is that we're able to not only get all these seemingly disparate groups together, but they're able to work together, come up with some ideas, and then implement them. And I think as long as that core stays intact, then we can just keep moving forward.
Great. Kevin?
Yeah, what they said. Yeah, I mean, I think going beyond energy has been interesting to watch and be part of. When I joined the board back in 2013, the name of the Energy Committee was the Smart Energy Now Committee, which was the behavioral program, and has now become the Energy Committee, which Rob actually chairs. So the evolution of some of that into deeper opportunities, additional opportunities, some of the partnerships with UNC Charlotte have actually been pretty tremendous to watch over time as students that are in these disciplines have an opportunity to take their learning outside of the classroom and actually put it in the real world in working with these buildings, doing audits of these buildings, performing recommendations for these buildings on equipment upgrades and opportunities. So it's been interesting to watch over time that academic along with the public-private piece and the components they continue to bring both in the energy realm as well as with water, waste, and certainly the air component is.
Couldn't agree more with all of you. I think that awareness for a company of our size is really critical within our employment base. You know, we've got several 100,000 people, and we've got a core group that are very passionate about sustainability, and they want to be involved any way they can, and this is a vehicle to help them do that. But it's also a vehicle that we can use through our internal My Environment communications to talk about opportunities. And then, you know, specifically as it relates to Charlotte, the public-private partnership, the demonstration of the model has been critical, because I think that's one of the challenges when you go outside of Charlotte and go outside of the U.S. It's getting these different constituencies to work together. And Charlotte's a small enough community and a driven, you know, pro-business community that we're able to bring those constituents together and create success and then demonstrate that we can take this to other places, which is ultimately what we want to do.
Rob, how does this benefit the city and the branding of Charlotte?
It has been a huge opportunity for the city branding-wise. Tom hinted at this, but as the word of Envision got out, not only in the national community, but the international community, people really recognized that we had something unique here. We talk about being the first in the United States with this unique model. I think that was true. But even as I've had the opportunity to travel abroad, specifically to Amsterdam and Barcelona, talking about this, and I have people coming up from all over Europe and saying, wow, this is something really amazing that you have here. Not only are you taking this technology, but the way that you're able to work together. And in Amsterdam, what really struck me is because Amsterdam people always think of Amsterdam as having so many of these projects, and they do, is they love the behavior change that we're focused on, because they're not as focused on the behavior change piece of it. So we're continuing to do that. So as I said, I think as we do more work, it's just going to brand Charlotte, put us in an even better light going forward.
Great. Kevin, how does the utility, I mean, the traditional thinking is the more utilities sell, the better they do. How does this project work for Duke?
Sure. So with the recovery mechanisms that we have in place, we're actually incentivized to promote and encourage reductions of our products. So it's a fairly unique, in some regard, incentive mechanism. Not all our jurisdictions have it, but we're certainly lucky enough here in the Carolinas to have it. So it puts energy efficiency and our promotion of energy efficiency on a level playing field, if not a slightly better playing field, than the traditional utility model of actually putting steel on the ground, producing a kilowatt hour, and putting that back in a rate base. So it's made it a competitive alternative, certainly from a financial standpoint, and provides a nice platform for us to interact with our customers as well in their interest.
The next question is for Robert, Kurt, and Tom. And that is, how does this project benefit you as a corporate entity? This is bragging time.
Well, I will tell you, I can maybe speak for everybody and say that there was a corporate citizen dimension to it. So it was just very exciting to be a part of it with our company name, and that was fulfilling. But as Rob was saying earlier, that the reaction has been so great. People are calling and want to know, how do we do this? And we're currently engaged in 3 other cities in the U.S. and trying to help put together these kind of programs. So it's been indirectly and directly beneficial for us.
Great.
Yeah, from a Wells perspective, Charlotte is our #1 team member city, I guess. We've got over 20,000 team members as part of the greater Charlotte area. And, so it's a big deal for our company. It dovetails really well with the renewed environmental commitment that we came out with a couple of years ago. And again, it's kind of this behavioral piece that we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about internally within our company. We're thinking about a lot of other things that drive, and we've got a kind of a grassroots green team member community within our organization that are volunteers that are trying to drive this. And it actually worked really well in the Envision Charlotte model to kind of leverage those resources to, champion some of these campaigns that were going on within the buildings to really try to drive behavioral change. And so it was a great experience for us and something that we want to try to mirror in other communities.
I would say Wells and B of A are very similar. We've made a very public $70 billion environmental commitment or sustainability commitment. The large chunk of that investment goes through, the banking business model, how we lend, where we get involved. There is a piece that goes into philanthropic efforts, and we certainly are supporting Envision Charlotte in that way as well. But also we've made commitments operationally, which is in a large part where my role comes in. So these real estate properties all over the globe that we have, and they range from big data centers and trading floors to little banking centers to office buildings, warehouses, everything in between you can imagine, and there are thousands of them. And we are looking for ways to be more operationally efficient, and we've made commitments, regarding water usage, regarding emissions reductions, regarding waste stream reductions. And in some areas we're doing extremely well. In other areas we've got challenges, and we think this model can help us learn. Like waste diversion, for instance, is something we're just getting into as one of the 4 main pillars at Envision Charlotte. There's still a lot of opportunity there. I mean, these big companies and these big buildings create a lot of waste, and we need to get better at how we recycle more of it.
Terrific. I guess my next question, and Rob, I'll start with you, and I'd like all of you to answer it. What were we started down the road with certain benefits that we expected. What were the unexpected benefits from this?
The first one that comes to mind are those synergies. When you get this many different entities working together, there are just synergies that you might not think of when you first start out. So I think maybe Kevin mentioned UNC Charlotte, which is just, the main campus is just northeast of Charlotte, and they're approaching 30,000 students. It's grown tremendously. But they have a lot of phenomenal resources on site, and they're very close, and they have a real interest for their students and for their faculty to have real-world experiences. So as a board and as a nonprofit, and we have a representative from UNC on the board, we've been able to find opportunities to really partner with them. If you notice, one of the things I'm most excited about is the collaboration and partnerships. So to me, that's one of the things I don't think we saw. We were very focused initially on, okay, we've got to get smart energy now up and running. But then as we started looking around at who's doing what, we realized, oh, we could pull this group in and we can pull this group in and start getting synergies and really moving together as a team.
Kurt?
In addition to the synergies, I would say it was really interesting how this helped so many of the other organizations' existing goals. So whether it was research and development, whether it was sustainability with a corporation, whether it was economic development, it almost looked like it was a program waiting to happen that everybody jumped onto, even for their own benefit. So there was a lot of catalytic effect from that.
Yeah, I mean, I just have to echo what both of you guys said. I think, Charlotte does these public-private partnerships really well. I think Envision Charlotte's just been one more example where you get like-minded people together trying to row the boat in one general direction, and things just happen. They just start to click, and you start to to really see some opportunities to drive it even further than what you expected. And I think it's been all of that and more for us.
Kevin?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would just take it back to kind of the behavioral change piece to put some numbers to it. When we started, I think our initial anticipation was in the 4 to 5% range for behavioral change in these office buildings, and we achieved over 6% energy savings, which was fairly unexpected, I think, on our end as to the magnitude. Envision Charlotte achieved 8.4% in the first 3 years, with the behavioral piece being 6.2. So in addition to some of certainly the public-private collaborations and some of those things, certainly, what we achieved was much higher than what we initially expected.
A couple things come to mind. I think the ability for businesses to get exposed to new technologies and new ways of addressing some of the challenges we have with the waste stream is great. I mean, they're coming out of the woodwork to work with Envision Charlotte and show us what they have to offer, and we can look at them and look at potential alliances. It's a balancing act because there's a competing interest there, but there is great technology out there, and this becomes a vehicle to see it and test it, which is we're absolutely doing. And the collaboration with UNC Charlotte has been really amazing because, the Duke Initiative, Energy Initiative, which we were just learning about earlier this afternoon, very similar. I mean, they've got a curriculum-based program now and majors being developed that are partly tapping into some of the data analytics and stuff that are supporting what we do, so it's pretty neat.
From my standpoint, having been there when we conceived it, the unexpected benefit that y'all talk about routinely as part of it is turning to dealing with water and waste. We never envisioned that when we focused initially just on reducing the amount of electricity use within the city during those peak periods. So that to me has there at the beginning but then vanished. That's kind of a remarkable evolution of what y'all are trying to achieve. Kind of in a similar way, what do y'all think the greatest challenge has been? I mean, it can't be sweetness and light all the way. There's got to have been some challenges or maybe even some unexpected downside. I mean, let's be blunt. We talked about the benefits, talk about the challenges and unexpected downside. And Kevin, since you used to hang out in my neighborhood, I'm going to ask you to answer that first.
I'm going to have to duck and cover from these guys in a second. I think on our end, we had a couple challenges. One was on the technology side. We're using cellular service to try to bring back the interval meter data. So not to get overly complex here, but we have billable meters that sit on the building, look like the ones that sit on the side of your house or apartments, and we actually have a shadow meter that sits next to it. That meter is actually reading energy usage every 15 minutes, and we bring that back and we can aggregate and look at what the actual use uptown is at any given 15-minute interval, and we've actually built algorithms to show that on a second-by-second basis. We use a cellular network to bring that back. If you've ever been into a main city, cellular networks aren't great sometimes. There's certainly dead areas, and we had a lot of some technology issues in being able to try to pick that cell signal up, be able to bring it back. We were creating boosters that weren't necessarily yet available, so it was kind of new technology at the time, and working with Cisco and certainly with Verizon. Even on the kiosk side, we were using 4G at the time, and 4G was relatively new when this first launched. And so on the technology side, we're using boosters that are first of their kind, just developed out of the lab, seeing how they work, can't fall back to 3G like our phones can today. So we're still dealing with some of those technology issues. Our meters are down in vaults under buildings, which makes it even more complex to try to get out of the building and pick that signal up. So we did run into some technology issues. We did a lot of work. There were a lot of partnerships in trying to overcome some of those, and we did. We still run into those and face those from time to time, but it was a learning experience and certainly is helping set the ground for something Rob mentioned around smart cities. I think the other component that we probably run into some challenges with is around the data, and certainly data sharing and the aggregation of data. And that, we certainly have certain requirements from a utility standpoint that are placed upon us that are external to us around our ability to share that data and being able to come up with some agreeable solutions. Rob's laughing. Be able to come up with some agreeable solutions of how we can kind of integrate that data, share that data, and use that data, has been a challenge.
Rob?
Well, it's kind of fascinating because Kevin and I have been deep into this over many months, but data sharing for big corporations, it's amazing what they can be afraid of. And so if you think about, do I really want my big office building with a trading floor to be propped up next to an all-office building that looks a whole lot more energy efficient because it's not sucking up all the power to trade, you name it, worldwide 24/7. And so you have to build a story about why this is important and that we can differentiate the uses in the building to, disaggregate the data and make it look more fair and not put some kind of a label on a particular building. So that's really important. And then the other thing is, I can tell you, and I'm sure that Kurt has the same issue, there are plenty of jurisdictions where we have buildings where we have to report more than we do in Charlotte, by mandate. So, you've got to create the awareness that this isn't all that special. It's just not being done in Charlotte. We're doing it because we're required to do it by other governmental entities. So let's just move on and share the data and learn from it.
Rob?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with my collaboration theme. And I'm glad you asked the question because there's a flip side to collaboration, right? Kurt mentioned herding cats, and that's what we're doing a lot of times. I mean, this is a really big project. There are 5 of us here, but there's 61 buildings, 20 million plus square feet. You think of all the different silos, right? You hear about everybody works in their silos, and we are constantly working to knock down those silos, and you're dealing often with decades of institutional norms that you're trying to address. So there's one, just a basic communication hurdle, making sure everyone that needs to be in the loop is in the loop. For example, you talk about the technology. Kevin was very involved in working to get the infrastructure up for what's called Charlotte Smart Water, where we're basically collecting all this water data. And we have Charlotte Water involved, Duke Energy's involved, Charlotte Department of Transportation is involved because they oversee the right-of-way, and everything doesn't necessarily go smoothly. And there are moments where the right hand might not know what the left hand is doing, but at the end, we're able to work it through. But I think communication is the key to addressing those situations.
Kurt, you're in a unique place to see all this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go back to the data comment. Data for me is key, and especially when you're trying to drive a behavioral change, letting individuals who want to engage in that effort understand if they're making a difference, I think is really important. And getting to a level of transparency and predictability around the data, I think, is really important. Ourselves, much like Rob and the B of A team, we've got operational goals that we try to track and measure, and 2014 was the first year we started doing that on a quarterly basis and really getting to a level of transparency that we hadn't had before. And I think it gives you a better perspective about, how are you still on track with that north on the compass and moving in the right direction, or has something gone sideways? So I think especially as we start to launch these other programs in waste and water, being predictable and transparent about the data and about the results is really important.
Tom, tell us a little bit from your perspective, because you're working with other cities now and you're seeing kind of how they're moving through the process, and no project goes smooth. There's always things that are tough.
And also, as our role as a consultant to Duke, we had a responsibility to get to a result. And so one of our challenges was too many great ideas. So you start this big idea, wow, it's going to change the world. You attract all these people to you, and they're like, oh, we should do this, and ask the building owners to invest in that, and we should call these people, and we should go outside of here. And we knew if we didn't have laser focus, we would be like many other environmental and smart city groups where literally all things to all people. And actually, we canvassed about 10 around the country, and that was the feedback that we got. We have so many programs going, it's hard to say in an elevator pitch what we are. And we said we are downtown Charlotte, commercial office buildings, over 10,000 square feet, connect and measure, and that's what we are. And it was hard, but we did not go outside of those bumpers until we had a program in place, and then we were at a place to kind of expand from there. So it's funny, too many great ideas can dilute the program.
Well, you know, that kind of raises an interesting question where, and I'm going to be challenging in kind of the way I frame it. We were going to do a 20% reduction by 16. This is 15. I think the way I measure it by reading the paper, at least the Charlotte Observer, and assuming it's true, is that we're roughly at 8%. And so my question is, how do we get to 8 from 8 today? And Tom, I'm going to stay with you.
Sure.
8 today to 20 by the end of 16.
Sure, so at this point you need to expand the methods, right? So in the beginning, some of those focus aspects were really about geography and use type, not limiting how we could get there. And we really wanted to take them in some kind of an order, connect and measure, because if we didn't have the needle, we couldn't measure anything. Then it was awareness and behavior, which was really the groundbreaking thing, because awareness and behavior for 100,000 people hadn't been done very well before at all. And so to your point now, we're moving into creative financing, more solution partners, really broadening the way that we get there. So I think the idea was it was going to take a little bit longer to get the beachhead, and now we have lots more creativity. I think the velocity will pick up now to get to that second half.
Now let me, Kevin, ask you that question. I mean, I'm the guy that made the commitment, okay, in 11.
And we appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I'll see you after class.
Yes, and I just want to know, how are we going to get to that goal line?
Right. It's a good question. I'll let Rob chime in as well on the energy committee side. But I think to echo some of that, I mean, we got 6.2% of the way there on behavior change, and quite honestly, the range of reductions that we saw building to building were incredible. We saw some buildings that actually increased their usage. We had some buildings that were down over 20%, and this is third-party verified measured data. This is not Duke reporting the data. So we think there's a lot more opportunity, one, on the behavioral side to continue to churn through some of that. But certainly, and through Rob's leadership, we're looking at other opportunities to engage, and I mentioned UNC Charlotte as an example. We're doing a building energy roundtable. So what we quickly learn is that a lot of these buildings don't necessarily have the expertise that Rob's building would have, or that Kurt's buildings will have, in actually how they manage and how they operate. And so we're actually leveraging the students to actually come in, audit and assess those buildings and look for opportunities to reduce energy usage. And we're actually seeing energy reduction opportunities, I think, north of 20%. And being able to bring financing options available, being able to bring partners available to complete the work has really removed quite a few of the barriers, I think, that some of these buildings encounter, and not knowing where to start and what to do, and being hammered externally, vendor after vendor after vendor, and not knowing kind of what's the truth and what's not. So I think we've done a pretty good job. Rob has done a great job in really inventorying the products that we have, really inventorying the efforts and initiatives that we have, and looking at how close can we get to that 20% sustained number at the end of 16 from where we are today. What initiatives do we have to get there? What gaps do we have? And continuing to use what we've put together as an energy committee with a number of representatives on it, of trying to come up with some of that gap analysis, performing that gap analysis, and looking at additional initiatives.
Rob?
You summarized it really well. I think operational issues are a big opportunity for us. So we've tapped into behavior. We need to spread behavior in a grassroots basis everywhere we can, and it's gotten us halfway there. But we have just begun to scratch the surface on just this universe of 60 buildings and understanding how are they operating. Are they efficient? Are they not efficient? Do they have smart systems in their buildings? And if they do they know how to use them? You know, we've got a lot of expertise that we can share as a sort of a free resource within this little realm that, they're very sophisticated, building management system managers that can help some of these people that may not know how these things work. Or we can also look at them and say, you don't have one, but you can put one in and you'll get a payback in 2.5, 3 years, whatever, depending on the system. And some are so easy, it's simply changing out lighting systems, and their paybacks are wonderful on those, and the energy savings are wonderful too. So the level of sophistication and knowledge varies within the universe, but we all benefit by having the collaboration.
I think we continue to learn too, if you don't mind.
Sure,
on the, we talked about the challenges, and we talked about 61 buildings. Well, that seems easy. There's 61 people to talk. No, right? Buildings are constantly being sold, new property managers are being hired, others are being let go, and you're continuing trying to engage and influence. But beyond that, you've got tenants that sit in those buildings. We have certain buildings that are single tenant buildings, meaning that the same owner is the tenant in the building. We have others that every other floor you've got a different tenant sitting on. And as you're trying to create and articulate value propositions to those groups, for them to connect, to engage into some of these efforts, to push their building owners, to push their property managers, partake in some of this, to look at these additional opportunities, that can be a challenge because everyone has their own motivations. And when you're not paying a utility bill, but I'm encouraging you to reduce, I've got to tap into something other than financial and how I'm going to do that. And I think we've learned a lot over time, and we're not great at it, but we're better than we were when we started in trying to do that. So even trying to build the initial engagement with these buildings and get the contract signed was a challenge. But even when we overcame that, we still continue to have opportunities, I think, as we work with these different stakeholders, both that are collaborating to try to drive this change, and those that are, in some regard, the recipients of the collaboration, and how do we effectively engage them and help empower them and empower and influence their buildings that they set in to continue to reduce and look for opportunities.
Great. Rob, from your standpoint.
Yeah, I just want to dig down a little deeper on 2 points that Kevin and Rob referred to. So Duke Energy, they were successful in meeting the goal they had to for Smart Energy Now. And now there's Smart Energy in offices, which is kind of behavior change round 2. And that's looking at learning from the lessons from the first round and employing them in the second round. And one of the things we've been talking to Duke about is the opportunity to not only focus just on energy with the behavior change program, but also to factor in water and waste. So that's one thing that I think will help us continue the behavior change piece, because we don't want it to just be a one-time behavior change, because as we all know, some habits are easier to break than others, such as turning off your lights. But one of the other things that we're doing is this energy roundtable, which I think has really great potential to really put a dent in energy use. And I wanted to illustrate it a little through an example. One of the buildings that Envision has been talking to is where BB&T is located. And the UNC Charlotte team came in and did the assessment of the building and basically said, I can't remember what the percentage is, but it was a huge energy reduction if they did a complete lighting retrofit with controls, because the lighting is so old in there. And one of the values that Envision brings to the table is not only that audit, but one of the things Envision can do is help them vet potential vendors. Because you'll hear from these building managers is people are approaching us all the time with the silver bullet, and we're so busy just keeping the lights on that we don't have time to figure out who's got the best product and what works. So Envision, through its experts and others, can say, okay, we're going to bring 3 to 4 vendors to the table. They can bid on it. And then the last thing we're working on is the financial piece. And I'm not sure if folks are familiar with PACE financing, but PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy Bonds. And North Carolina has legislation. Unfortunately, it's set to expire at the end of June, but indications are that the General Assembly is going to get rid of the sunset provision. But what that allows is for the city of Charlotte, or really any municipality, to float a bond that can be used for energy efficiency. A financial institution purchases it and then is allowed to give lower interest loans, in this case to the commercial sector, and they have a longer period of time to pay it back. So one of the things we've been working on is trying to bring this kind of the last piece of that package to the roundtable. We'll do your audit, we'll help you find vendors, and we're going to find really attractive financing for you and give them this all kind of a la carte.
And there's one more dimension even to that, is the landlord-tenant business model that exists today. And I think you said earlier, if the tenant doesn't pay the bill, why do they care, and how do you get them motivated? Well, we've all heard green leases, but there's maybe not just a green lease, maybe there's more of a sub-metered lease, a little bit simpler, where you drive that care and that financial interest down further and further. So we all know the further that gets down to the individual person, that's where the actual results can happen.
And I'm sorry, the most important piece, well, not the most important, the payment is put on that entity's property tax. That's why it's property assessed clean energy bond. So once a year, usually when they get their property tax bill, there'll be a line item that says you owe $100,000 or whatever to pay off your loan. Sorry.
Rob,
No, I was just going to say application development associated, a tool to make it easier for that transparency at the tenant level, at the floor level, for all the people that we want to see engage in the behavioral change, if we make it easier for them to see the results of their actions, all the better. So we're working on that as well.
Kurt?
Yeah, I mean, the good news for me is that there's been a technology explosion in the building space, and you know, the things that were maybe out of reach from a capital investment standpoint a few years ago are very much within reach today. You mentioned the lighting retrofit. You guys walk around a Lowe's or a Home Depot today, and you look in the lighting section, there's LED lighting all over the place, and it's, you know, fantastic technology, 60 to 90% more efficient than what's out there on the market. Better quality of light, more even goes on and on. I mean, the story just keeps getting better. Fault detection diagnostics and continuous commissioning, these analytics platforms exploded over the last few years. And these are pretty low cost of entry, but it's basically using technology to kind of help you manage the building in a way and to a level of transparency that we've never had before. The technology that you're walking around today with your iPhone is now kind of being pointed toward the building sector, and it's really, really, really exciting time to be in that space, and lots of options to be able to drive efficiencies in a much more effective way than in the past.
I think I'm feeling good about that 2016 target, right?
You struck a nerve.
Huh? Let's go to the beginning. We made the decision to make a commitment at the Clinton Global Initiative. When you make a commitment there, they vet it, then they also measure it. Do y'all believe that using the Clinton Global Initiative, did that in any way shape or influence the project, and if so, how? Rob?
From an awareness perspective, there's no doubt it got us much higher on many more radar screens than we otherwise would have been. So that's a wonderful thing. And you know, I think a number of the people on the panel were involved in making that happen, so I'll let them speak to it.
I mean, to me, I think it set the tone from collaboration up front, that we brought the collaboration to the table, that we were willing to put the stake in the ground. And I think from the Clinton Global Initiative, in addition to the awareness, it also drove accountability. So we actually have responsibility to go back on a certain frequency and report our results, report on our lessons learned. We did that about a year ago at the Americas Conference. And so it created that ability, as well as some additional networking opportunities that have been created, both from solution providers as well as others that are interested in pursuing some of their own initiatives and wanting to learn more about some of our lessons learned.
Yeah, I'd almost ask you the same question because you were involved from the very beginning of this. You know, from my perspective and my role, it was a great platform to convince those that I needed to allow the city to engage with it. When you have, you know, the head of Duke Energy, the head of Cisco, the head of Verizon, and the mayor standing on a stage announcing this, there's obviously something to it as opposed to another one of Rob's crazy projects. So it definitely helped internally, and then just, you know, echoing what folks said, I think going forward there's this opportunity to say, hey, we've got something else new. Can we come back, CGI, and tell you what we launched here a few years ago and all the great stuff that we've done with it?
I think it showed us in one day when we heard a much higher calling and purpose. I mean, we all love Charlotte. We all thought this would be a great model, even great for the utilities. But at that scale, I think everybody felt just a higher sense of purpose and motivation to really draft through. And not to mention that the announcement date was a lot sooner than our planned date. But
That's how life works out.
But it was really quite a shot.
Kurt, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo all the rest. I was probably not as close to it back then as some of you were, but to echo Rob's comment, I'm sure the exposure has brought more service providers to Charlotte than might have otherwise come, and that's been a huge benefit for us. So,
I'm always interested in projects and surprises, or what I would call aha moments. Tom, I mean, as you work through this, any aha moments?
You mean in the project in general?
Yes.
I really think CGI was one of those aha moments in that not only what we all just said, but you just touched on the vendors, because the solution providers, Cisco and Verizon, all of a sudden realized this truly was a global model. And I think that was a moment where we went from trying to do something great for Charlotte that we thought had some framework models to everybody involved in the project really realize at that moment that it was going to be a CGI, that this was a model. So when you bring in those really big companies who now get that sense of repeatability, I think that was really a great moment.
Anybody else have an aha?
For me, I think, and Rob hit on it earlier, this is the concept of smart cities. So I think when we started this, I'm not sure the concept of smart cities existed. So as you look at smart cities now, and this idea of connectivity that you can create, engagement that you can create, with some sustainability focus in mind, it's very interesting to me, an aha of, wow, we kind of set the foundation for some of this. And I think as you look at where technology is going and the opportunities of creating interoperability within a system, we've seen very quickly that we don't have that today, and that we've kind of piece and part things together, but we've made it work. So I think for me, it's laying the foundation potentially for the smart city and seeing the opportunities of pushing this forward, and probably looking back in 5 years and probably sitting around the table laughing of how antiquated we were, of how we went about doing this because of what technology allowed then and where we are from a technology standpoint.
It's pretty amazing that little Charlotte too went from, kind of chasing around the world to see who's doing this, how's it work, is there anybody that's making it happen, to all of a sudden they're coming to Amy and the management team of Envision Charlotte and saying, come tell us what you're doing. It's pretty cool.
I think that's an interesting point, because we had this phrase during the project that downtown Charlotte was big enough to matter, but small enough to manage. And we had all the elements of any other major urban environment, but just smaller. Pro teams, corporate headquarters, government, private development, public transportation. We had all the elements of the great urban centers, but it was in an environment of size that we could manage and create that model.
My aha moment was, I mentioned earlier that I had an opportunity to travel to Barcelona, and that was in this fall, and we were, it was Barcelona every year has the Smart City World Expo. They've kind of decided that they are going to be the smart city of the world, and they have this big convention every year. But they also have awards that they give out, and they give out kind of the Smart City Award, an Innovative Project Award, and I can't remember what the third one is. And we put Envision in the hat for the Innovative Project, and we were one of 6 finalists. We didn't win, but sitting in this ballroom in Barcelona with a couple thousand people from all around the world, thinking back to, yes, we had this great start with Smart Energy Now, but the rest of it was a core group of us volunteering our time, sitting in a conference room in the Duke Energy Tower, thinking about the possibilities, and being called up on stage with Tel Aviv and Nairobi, and it was just kind of like, wow, we have really found something special here that has really great potential. And I could still just remember sitting there, and I guess it kind of was an aha moment. I didn't think of it at the time, though, but it was really exciting.
I guess my other question is this is an example of people coming together, making a project happen. And it was just people coming together, motivated to make it happen. Does any policy come to mind that grows out of this? Or were there any policies that played through the implementation of this project? Because often in life, policy comes and corporations, cities, governments, others go to work and implement. This is a case where people came together and implemented, and kind of like shale gas in a way. Shale gas was an example of smart people coming together, figuring out how to make it happen, and then the policy around shale gas is coming later. So is there any policy that comes out of this as you think about it? Rob?
It's really interesting.
I don't want to add any more regulations to you, but
Yeah, please. I guess what I would hope would come out of it is it may be a more an informal policy result, but for all the reasons that Tom was just articulating, the ability to get it done in Charlotte, because Charlotte's kind of special in its size and level of cooperation, maybe we can push it out. Maybe we can use it as a lever to say, okay, for my portfolio, we did it in Charlotte. Now go do it in Chicago. Now go do it in wherever. So it can be a way of pushing it, because it's clear to everybody in the room and everyone involved in this stuff how important it is, but it's not easy. So if you can create an example and then push it out into these systems, it's an opportunity.
other comments on this?
Yeah, I think one of our approaches was we wanted to inspire policy, maybe as opposed to create it.
Got it.
And we had very much of a very defined carrot approach and not a stick approach. There are many municipalities and states and codes and laws where it's a stick. You must reveal your energy consumption, you must do this kind of thing, and there's a lot of that going on and some good in it. But what we wanted to do was to create an environment where there was no reason to say no. And so we very carefully and very purposefully put together a value proposition that said, look, we're going to unite here as a community to reduce energy consumption. Now, you might call it carbon, you might call it profit, you might call it economic development. It's the same action produces 3 different kinds of results, fine. And so we really didn't take a strict environmental approach or a strict capitalistic approach. We spent a lot of time talking about every single word as to not alienate folks and to draw them in. And the result of that, one of the most humbling results, notwithstanding the energy reductions, was we got 99% of building owners to contractually sign up to participate in this program. And it was not a pledge, it was a document that had insurance issues and liability issues in it. And so, that was to me one of the foundational successes, was to create an environment where there was no reason to say no, and we didn't have to alienate any constituencies.
See, that's an aha moment for me. I mean, you can't get 99% of the people in this room to agree to something and sign a piece of paper and make a commitment.
Much less in the real estate culture. If anybody knows real estate, you've got real estate investment trusts, private owners, corporate real estate, government-owned buildings. We had everything you can imagine. And to this day, I think that is a hard figure to understand. But a carrot approach seemed to work for us.
I'm going to open it up to questions from the group, if I may, at this time. I have a couple more questions. Tanya?
Yeah, actually, I have a list of about 6 questions, but I'm only going to try to figure out which is the best one to ask to start with. This is a great panel, and I think you guys have a lot to teach other people. So I will take that thought and ask you, this is two parts. One is, are you seeing other cities in North Carolina come to Charlotte and say, we want to replicate this in our city, or can we start competing city to city, for instance? And then, I've got my, Rob, for instance, I'm thinking of a big carbon challenge, but in any event. The other question I have is, what policies or what body do you think should be taking this idea and taking it out to others? I mean, you have your hands full implementing it in Charlotte. Like, do you see some outside assistance or some way that you take this idea and you spread it? So that's kind of a 2-part question.
Yeah, just a couple quick thoughts. First of all, using existing groups, economic development groups, environmental groups, neighborhood groups, is the way to kind of already have a convening body. So you have a place to have a conversation, you can cater to their interests, and that's a place to get some critical mass. And I'd let Jim and Kevin comment on this. The foundation of this, though, was discovering a business model to get the thing started within the confines of the utility regulatory environment. And that's what really got it going, good for all parties in terms of that business model. And that was the foundation. We used that to gain some notoriety and brand, and then branch off to grants and other ways to sustain what we were doing. But I might want them to comment on that.
Yeah, so we actually took Smart Energy Now. Rob alluded to it. It was a pilot program. That's the behavioral component to the energy savings. And as a result, we were successful. We formed it as a pilot. We took on the risk from a pilot standpoint. As we proved it successful, we've actually commercialized the program into called Smart Energy in Offices. The challenge when we went through the development of that program, though, was how do we create this same feeling of community? Does it need to be a city? Does it need to be a municipality? Should it be based on zip code? What does that feel look like? And we actually landed on it's a geographic area, although that's not firm, but there needs to be at least 3 buildings. We felt that creates this sense of community and this sense of togetherness, and that we're going to drive out results and the opportunity for those buildings to have some spirit of competition as well, kind of through that process. So we've actually launched that program across our Duke Energy Carolinas territory. We've actually filed for pilot approval in Ohio as well, and we're evaluating in our other jurisdictions. So we were actually able to take a component, a small component at this point of Envision, and actually leverage the business case that Tom mentioned, and able to replicate that in other areas. So we've seen some value there. I think that we've been able to prove to our regulators that this concept of behavior change in the commercial space is real, that we can be successful in that, and it's actually launched and propelled us to evaluate opportunities in other areas. We're looking at behavioral programs for hospitals. We're looking at it for schools. Kind of the list goes on. So it's kind of propelled our thinking and other opportunities. As far as other cities being interested, we have had other cities kind of contact us and say, kind of, what are you doing? Whether it's been through Energy Star, and they're saying, how can we reduce 5 or 10%? Do we think that's achievable? What can you bring to the table? We oftentimes bring some lessons that we learned, and we still continue to learn from this effort around public-private partnership, around the academic component to it as well. So we haven't found anyone to this point, at least that I've been involved with, that want to take it to the scale and scope of what Charlotte's doing, but certainly in pieces and pockets, there certainly is interest in being able to unite a community or unite a building or whatever it happens to be, and looking at energy opportunity, operational savings. And so we've been able to help replicate some of that for our customers.
Can I?
Yes.
On the North Carolina piece, I'll echo what Kevin said. I've had interest on pieces of it, but no one saying, hey, we're looking to replicate this in Raleigh or Greensboro. This is a big undertaking, basically setting up a non-government entity, which I think is key to our success to do this work. In terms of spreading the message, aside from panels like this or opportunities I get to go speak, or the executive director Amy gets to go speak, the entry into the smart cities dialogue has been a way for us to really tell Envision's story. So for example, there's a professional association called the Smart Cities Council, and their members are corporate entities that do smart cities work. So the GE, MasterCard, Siemens, IBM, and they meet quarterly, and they just had, because of the work we've been doing with Envision, their quarterly conference in Charlotte. There is another group that has, whose name I just forgot, but another opportunity that we've been contacted about is the White House's Office of Science and Technology has heard about Envision, and they're trying to figure out what space they can play in. So we were part of a conference call talking to them about what we're doing with Envision. So the work we're doing is kind of getting out to the entities who are kind of in the smart cities realm, and they want to hear the story, and we're more than happy to tell them about it. So as they start telling the story and other cities hear about it, I think there'll be more opportunities for replication.
And I touched on it just earlier a little bit, but I can tell you right now we're actively engaged in programs in San Francisco, San Jose, and Bellevue, Washington. Slightly different, but the same principle of awareness and behavior, limited geography, and tapping that awareness and behavior dimension that is usually not tapped. So it's happening with these organizations, these advocacy groups, but also now at some actual city levels and a few more of interest. So one of the real gratifying things of all of us who've been doing this for 5 or 6 years is that we wanted to do something for Charlotte, but also pass that model on, and it is just beginning to take a foothold. Very exciting.
Other comments? Another question? Yes.
Thank you, this is amazing. So I have two questions. The first one is like, why Charlotte? Like, there are so many cities in the United States that
I'm pointing to you.
pro-business cycle, pro-business culture, and have a lot of great operations. But why specifically? Why happen here in Charlotte? Is it just the single person's initiative, or someone leads this, or there's something, some histories behind this? And my second question is about the cost for the ambition. Like, how costly it would be for this transition, like in behavioral or just for maybe operations? Would that be applicable to developed countries where those urban cities would be considering the cost for doing similar models? Well, I mean, it makes sense for like Barcelona or Amsterdam to come here and learn from this, but would, like some cities in India would be interested in coming and learn. Would they learn something like some low-cost measures that can be applied there?
Do y'all want to?
You should take a stand.
I think that Charlotte is the perfect test bed for something like this, and it is rather unique. I've been involved in our portfolio all over the place, and there really aren't very many cities that have this combination of cooperative public-private environment that we have. And it's also not too big, because if you get into a larger city, it just becomes much more complex. It's almost geometric in nature, the way that works. So the size is critical, but the level of collaboration, I don't see it in I don't see it in any of the other cities I work in, and I work all across the country. So I think it is kind of special in that way. It doesn't mean that it has to stay special. I mean, we create the model and we replicate it and we take it other places, to your earlier question, but it's a good place to establish it.
You might even argue that Charlotte is a model for that apart from Envision Charlotte. There is a long history of the corporate leaders really aligning even competitors, bitter competitors, for the benefit of their corporate headquarters and city. And I think that was, there was also a dimension of just, I tell you, when I went on those first few calls, the sense of corporate citizenship and world citizenship was right at the beginning of the conversation. There was no talking into it. They understand we have a role as a corporation to shareholders, but also in other ways too. And so I think that's evident in a lot of corporations in Charlotte. There just has to be there happens to be a density of that.
I wasn't joking when I pointed to Jim. I think he's being humble, and maybe we haven't done justice to the leadership that he had, not only for Envision Charlotte, but also looking to create Charlotte as an energy hub. I mean, not only was he a tremendous corporate leader for Duke, but he was a tremendous corporate citizen. And I think when you have the CEO of one of your major companies, and they also happen to be, well, now they're the biggest energy company, standing up and saying, hey, troops, we have to rally, that has a big impact on the community. Getting to your point about replicating it, the other group that I forgot to mention earlier that actually reached out to us is a new group. It's called the City Protocol Society. And they have a global scope, and what they're looking to do is bring cities into the fold to develop a protocol around certain topics. And they reached out to the city of Charlotte because of Envision. So we're the first city in the United States to join the City Protocol, but they have Quito, Ecuador, Moscow, Dubai, Amsterdam, and I'm forgetting someone else. There is someone, it might be Mumbai, but their idea is to kind of start with the bigger cities and then have it trickle down. So we're in the process of joining them, and they've gotten a lot of support from around the world.
On that train, one more thing, and I apologize, Jim, but
No, it's great.
When Jim and Duke had that idea for Duke to participate for a lot of good reasons, he also reached out to John Chambers at Cisco and his counterpart at Verizon, really large companies, not necessarily dense in Charlotte, and said, we're doing something here that should matter to you, and I'm asking you to participate. So it's really that willingness to stretch out a little bit further that pulled in those, and they were very large participants because of that.
Other comments? Yes, Richard?
I'm going to try and be a role model. I was supposed to instruct people to come up to the mic, but I didn't. Question on the financing side of this, and it came up in at least two different ways, Rob and also Tom. So let me start with Rob on the PACE financing, which I take it that that's something that you think in a forward-looking manner could be a productive instrument for getting future energy savings, but has not been used yet.
That's right.
And is up for either expiration or permanent reauthorization, potentially with some changes. Are there any things that need to change that make that a potentially more useful instrument? The other financing question I have is, I think, more for Tom, which has to do with this landlord-tenant problem, right? So if tenants are not paying their utility bills, they're not going to be as concerned about lowering the cost, at least from a financial point of view. So what is the current percentage of, roughly speaking, of rental agreements that separate out utility bills versus not? And do you see there being not policy innovation, but market innovation toward potentially changing that contractual relationship in a way that could stimulate market-based reductions in energy savings?
So what you're touching on is a really, really important topic, and that is stakeholder value proposition. So when you look at this program, you've got multiple stakeholders. You've got, of course, the utility and the city and the big players. But even within a building, you've got the owner, you've got the major tenants, the facility managers, and the actual occupants themselves. And we realized you had to create value propositions for each one of them. And I think that's where we had some success, was being able to talk to those different stakeholders all the way down through the process and create a value proposition for them.
Yeah, on the PACE piece, I'll try and take 4 years of work and boil it down to a couple of minutes. But we first started looking at PACE when we got our DOE stimulus grant. We got $7 million through DOE to do energy efficiency work, and really wanted to get PACE up and running. But you also have to remember the time. You need a big financial partner, and you have to remember the time that we started doing this. You know, the banks had gone through some turmoil. This was a whole new concept. So we convened Bank of America, Wells Fargo, but it was too hard to get going, and we had to move really quickly because of the stimulus deadlines. You know, fast forward to the past year, where I saw an opportunity, and some other folks with Envision, to take another run at PACE to do this energy roundtable piece. So we've been talking to some financial institutions. I'm not going to. A couple of them are at the table, but some others too, to get them involved. But there's still hesitancy. You know, one part of your question, what needs to change? Well, one, we have to remove the sunset. It can't expire, or else we just can't do it. And there are some language tweaks that would make it easier to do, but I think we can work with what we have. But it's really getting some partners to say, hey, we want to do this. We see the opportunity there. I think there's a huge opportunity, answering your question, to bring this financial piece in, but it's new. And California's starting to do it, Alabama's starting to do it, Connecticut is starting to do it. I think if we're able to do it in Charlotte, I think it could be a real role model for North Carolina and the Southeast. And that's what I'm hoping, is the dominoes will start to fall.
So that is the landlord perspective, and I think you asked another question about the tenant. In a large commercial multi-tenant office building, the tenant is king. So if I'm a 3-floor law firm getting ready to re-up my lease, I'm in charge. And if I say the conditions of my next lease are I'm going to be sub-metered and pay my own bills, that's what you're going to get. So in the beginning, we started with building owners. Will you please connect your data to the program? And that was step one. As you get further down the road with things like lease structure, that's driven almost completely by the tenant, and that's where we sort of shifted our focus to say, we're starting to look for re-up leases and say, change what you require to lease somewhere else.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kurt.
I mean, the reality today is probably a small percentage of the portfolio is structured in that way. And also, as a building owner, everybody's got to be in that boat for you to understand kind of what's left that's not tenant-related consumption and be able to allocate that proportionately. But Wells Fargo's recently launched a program called Innovation Incubator, and one of the technologies, again, this technology explosion that's going through that program, it's in partnership with NREL, is a peel and stick meter. Watt stick is the technology. So, as this stuff starts to kind of bubble up and it gets easier and easier then I think you'll see more of this.
Yeah, and you just remind me of a point I failed to make, which is it's not only cold feet on the financial institution. I mean, you obviously have to have a government involved, but you need to have the building owner or whoever it is. And I also think building owners are getting more comfortable with this. I had a big building management group that isn't in Envision's footprint reach out to me and said, we've had success in this market, and I want to do this tomorrow at our property in Charlotte. Well, when I can go to a city council member or the city manager and say, hey, this huge corporate partner just called and they want to do a $3 million energy retrofit of their building. Well, that's jobs. It has a great environmental benefit, but it's a huge ED argument too. So I think you're just getting more people who are getting more familiar with it, and they do it and they realize this, hey, I've got a huge portfolio. Let me just start doing it everywhere.
And I think there's some other additional education opportunities and awareness, especially with some of the building owners and the property managers, even around their own lease structures. So there a lot of leases, some leases have CapEx cost recovery in them. Well, that CapEx cost recovery actually allows a building owner to actually upgrade equipment before the end of life, and as long as that upgrade actually reduces kind of the cost that the tenants would be subject to, they can actually recover that and claw that back through increased rent. So now you take an expenditure that you would have to come out of pocket for at end of life, and you can actually build it in to your lease if you're leveraging the structure. And I don't think that there's been certain instances where that provision hasn't been looked at on the energy side, although in many applications we've seen it's still practical and it's still allowable. So there can be, in some regards, even some education on the landlord or the owner side as to the constructs of the lease and what it allows them to do to look at some of these opportunities and push some of this maybe a little bit more forward versus waiting for that end of life for that chiller or whatever that piece of equipment is to actually end and now come out of pocket, thousands and thousands of dollars.
I'll take one more question. Yes.
This question is for Kevin. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the mechanics of the Smart Energy Now and Smart Energy for Offices programs, and exactly what you do to inspire the behavior change. I think you mentioned creating a competition, but can you elaborate a little more?
So I'm getting prodded here. Crabs. So we'll get into crabs. Basically, what we do is we create campaigns and initiatives. So the first part now of kind of going in with Smart Energy and Offices and kind of what we've learned from Smart Energy Now is really you've got to get the building owner, our customer has to be involved. They've got to sign the dotted line and on the contract that we've made much less tenuous than prior versions. But the other thing that we ask for are names of the tenants and the occupants or champions that we can contact within the building. We can chase our tail quite a while until we actually find somebody within the building and within the tenant or an occupant that's actually interested, engaged in this initiative. And so we kind of ask for some of that information up front. So what we look to do is we look to take a person, we call them a champion or a coach, and we actually build that out and use some of that grassroots to help build some of that environment within that floor, that tenant, that occupant, that building. And we support them in a couple ways. One is around building campaigns. One of probably the most famous campaign that we have is called Crab You're It. So crabs like light. So crabs go to light. So we actually have little plastic crabs, that if you leave your lights on, someone can crab you, and now you're it. And you actually have to keep that crab until you find somebody with their light on when they're not occupying a space, and you can leave that crab in their area. We actually didn't create that. We actually worked with the county, I think it was the county, and we sat down and they said, we need to customize some things, we've got some ideas, and this idea came up. We ran with it, we procured the products and we sent it out, and it's been a huge hit. We've done stuff with the county around looking at donating trees. So for every, however much usage reduced, we'll actually plant a tree or provide a tree that can be planted. So we look at kind of off-the-shelf kind of campaigns that people can kind of take up and look at leveraging, but we'll also work with them to create something that's customized that makes it fit their need. There was actually a customer we have in Charlotte, part of Envision Charlotte, and they were looking to create some teamwork. They were having some challenges bringing some different team members together. So we actually came to the table. We said, look, it's great for operational savings, but we think you can create a kind of a team environment from this. So they actually created a floor-by-floor challenge for each of their floors. And it actually had so much reduction in foot traffic to the elevators, they had to move, the building moved all of their signage to the stairwells because no one used the elevators as long as this challenge was going on for a pizza party or whatever it was. But it was that spirit of competition on those floors that brought those folks together. So we really, one, try to use these campaigns to drive the opportunity. The other thing that we've learned is the ability to capture the campaigns that are being done so people can report, track, can share, Facebook, tweet, Instagram, Snapchat. I'm not on any of them, but I hear many people are. So they can actually leverage those tools both to share as well as track some of the initiatives that they're undertaking. And so we found that's been helpful. One of the last piece and one of the campaigns that we've actually started has been around you can take challenges each day and earn points. So if you ride your bike to work, that's worth 5 points. If you didn't take the elevators but took the stairs, that's worth 3 points. You can play so many cards. It's essentially an online card game, and you can accrue points, and you can actually see where you are relative to your peers. And then you can associate prizes and things around that. So we really try to use some of that piece on the occupant and tenant side. And we're doing a lot more work as well on the facility manager, the maintenance team side of how they can better manage their building from an operational standpoint, because there seems to be certainly some behavioral change opportunities there as well.
And these programs are interesting because what we found when we engaged and had these conversations, so many people, the occupants themselves said, I was just never asked. My lease structure, and nobody cared, and that was all somebody else. I just came and went to work. And there were thousands of people, and how many energy champions, 2,000, 3,000, thousands of people came to training because they said, I was just never asked. Now I have a vehicle to participate.
So let me just tell you one funny story about the crabs. So it was a huge success, but we had an aha moment. It was a small one, but an aha moment. I had a few of my colleagues said, well, why do we have, I feel like I'm slapping someone on the wrist. I don't like doing that. Can't we do a rewards program? So I reached out to Duke and said, well, I heard this, can we do a rewards program? So Duke created, you got a little flip-flop. And it was if you flipped out the light, you were rewarded by getting this flip-flop. It was a total flop. Total flop. So what we learned was that people like telling on each other. They don't want to reward each other. I was flabbergasted by this. But when you compared who engaged with crab urette and who engaged with flip-flop and how long they stayed engaged, crab urette just blew the flip-flop out of the water. Blew the flip-flop, popped the flip-flop.
I think what we're hearing, that Envision Charlotte has been a rich mix of competition, behavioral changes, and the deployment of the explosion of technologies that's really allowing us to reduce usage within buildings. And I think this is a great success story. And I'd like to conclude by thanking all of y'all for being here. And I'd like for you to join with me and applaud this inspirational team that's made something great happen. Thank you. Yeah, go Duke.